Good morning, Mark. Good to be with you. Well, I have to say I think it's not a surprise. Kim Jong-un has demonstrated for many years that he's unreliable, that he can't be trusted. There was quite a bit of media celebration when the summit was announced, and I have to admit I had a great deal of skepticism then, because if there's one thing we've learned from Kim Jong-un, from his father and his grandfather, is that they make promises they have no intentions of keeping. They lie, and we have 3 generations of dictators, and so I think this outcome should not be surprising to anyone.
So I'm thinking about, everybody involved in positioning and posturing. We have our position. They have theirs. I was skeptical of what the summit would bring about. I didn't know. I had no pretense that it was suddenly everything was going to be rainbows and unicorns coming off the Korean Peninsula. But the opportunity to begin dialogue seemed like a good idea, a promising thing. I think it still is. And I think this is a uniquely Trumpian move in that as everybody sits there and wonders whether the North Koreans are going to show up, or the North Koreans going to let this happen, or the North Koreans are making everything revolve around them, the president has said, you know what, if you're going to dally around and hand wring and throw out a lot of bellicose language, then maybe we're the ones to pull the plug. And that does not seem improper.
I agree with you, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see a meeting happen at some later point. I think the president reacted properly to the continued hostility and antagonism and bellicose language from North Korea. And I think what this illustrates is a principle that has been true from time immemorial, which is that the best way to deal with bullies and tyrants is from a position of strength. That weakness and appeasement, what we saw during 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency, it doesn't work. And there's a reason why nobody goes to study at the Neville Chamberlain School of Diplomacy. And so, I think the president is doing the right thing by standing up to North Korea. Now, listen, no one should be under any illusions. North Korea remains the most dangerous place on the face of the planet. You have an unstable, megalomaniacal dictator with an arsenal of nuclear weapons and ICBMs that are capable of delivering those weapons to the continental United States. So we have reason to be concerned, but the best way to deal with a dictator in that position is not giving in. It's not weakness. It's standing up to them. And I think that's what the president is endeavoring to do.
The thing that seemed to set Kim off was Vice President Pence and maybe Ambassador Bolton talking about the following the Muammar Gaddafi model. Gaddafi was a guy who was a bad guy forever, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. Then he sort of had an epiphany, real or imagined, and reined in his own bad behavior. That is a model. That would be great if that were Kim Jong-un. Of course, Muammar Gaddafi was then brutally killed in the streets of his own country. Maybe Kim overanalyzed that, was too much made of that.
Oh, it could be. That there's no doubt if you look at Gaddafi and Gaddafi's ending his program for weapons of mass destruction, it wasn't that he suddenly became a nice guy. I mean, he was always a monster. He was interested in self-preservation. This was in response to George W. Bush. This was in response to the Iraq War. And Gaddafi was sitting there going, I'm next. They're coming after me next. And the only way to stop it is to shut down this program. I think he made the right decision there. And that, once again, showed the benefits of strength in dealing with dictators. Now, the second part of that, which is that it led to his being killed in the streets, that had a great deal to do with the perfidy of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And it was Obama and Clinton that led the international coalition government in Libya in the interest of, some sort of diffuse democratic interest. And what resulted in is we turned Libya over to warring radical Islamic warlords that has resulted in much more death and destruction and is a far greater threat to the United States. And I think it was a mistake for Obama and Hillary to lead the efforts to topple Gaddafi, but I certainly understand that analogy discouraging Kim from going forward.
You're involved in the Governor Greg Abbott roundtable of important people talking about gun violence, and I want to get into some nuts and bolts on that. But first, you made a very interesting observation about media and shared it in an in-depth interview, saying essentially that it is, because I noticed in the first day the difference between the media attention to Santa Fe and the media attention to Parkland. They both feature tragedy, or our hearts break, our prayers are sent down there. Interestingly, though, in Santa Fe, we did not get a long parade of students pouring out of that building calling for gun control, and that you think that means that led the media to cover this differently.
I think that's exactly right, and you know, I will say Santa Fe is a small community. It's about 30 miles outside of Houston. It's about a half hour from my house. I spent the entire day on Friday in Santa Fe, the day of the shooting, with the families, the teachers, with law enforcement. What happened there was beyond horrific. It's every parent's worst nightmare. But one of the amazing things, having spent quite a bit of time with students in the hospital who had been wounded, other students who were there to visit their friends who were also in the high school during the shooting, and then dozens of students who were at the prayer vigil that evening, is over and over and over again. It wasn't just that they weren't coming out like the students that CNN featured incessantly out of Parkland and calling for gun control. You know, when I was meeting with about a dozen students in the hospital, and Greg Abbott and I were both there, and we asked, so what's the answer? What's the solution to stop this from happening again? And Mark, every single high school student in the room, their response was, gun control is not the answer. If you take away our guns, it won't make us any safer. It'll just mean the killers and the murderers have guns. To a person, every single student said that affirmatively. And so we asked, all right, well, what sort of things can you get to do more to prevent these horrific mass murders? And, you know, they came up with all sorts of common sense suggestions, things like hiring additional armed police officers to have at schools to keep kids safe, so things like putting in metal detectors, things like reducing the number of doors and entrances into and out of the school so that you funnel people through. You know, you think about it, if you go to an office building or courthouse, they run you through one or two entrances with security right there, and then that's a way to harden security. And then several of the students said, you know, it'd make a real difference if our teachers could be armed. One student I visited with in that hospital room said he was in the adjoining classroom to where the shooting happened. And he said his teacher was a former Marine. And he said, you know what, if he'd been armed, he could have made a real difference stopping this guy, but he wasn't armed. He wasn't able to engage with him. And so those were the solutions coming from the students. And the problem, as you know, Mark, is those solutions don't fit the media narrative that they're trying to drive. They have a political agenda. And so Parkland was round the clock the only story on earth, whereas once the Santa Fe students actually demonstrated that they had different views, the media wanted nothing to do with it.
Those kids with those common sense Second Amendment cherishing views are not the kind of thing that attracts satellite trucks from the national media. So it's certainly attracted our thoughts and our prayers. What's been your main takeaway of seeing what's come out of the Governor Abbott panels, and what would you like to add?
Well, look, I think it is positive and beneficial that the governor is sitting down with all the different people impacted. I'm back in Texas today. Actually, the Senate is in session. I'd normally be in D.C., but I flew back home late last night to be here for the roundtable today. Actually, I'm in the car dropping off my youngest daughter at summer camp, and then driving up to Austin for the roundtable today, and it's going to feature a number of different state leaders, but also survivors from Santa Fe, but also from Sutherland Springs, which went through 6 months ago another unspeakable crime. And I think we'll have a positive and beneficial discussion about how to deal with this sort of tragedy, what it can do. You know, one of the things that I've been really blessed to do is get to know a number of the people who were in Sutherland Springs, the worst church shooting in the history of our country. And as much as horrific as it is what happened there, it also was inspirational. How the community came together, how they leaned on each other, the love. I'll tell you, that church showed the gospel and the love of Jesus Christ to the entire world. And it was just a couple of weeks ago, I was back at Sutherland Springs for the dedication of the new church they're building. And I was visiting with someone the morning in Santa Fe, a state official who was saying, this community will never know joy again. And I said, look, I understand that sentiment, but that's just not true. This will always be with them. But at the same time, what was meant for evil can be used for good. And I've seen that in Santa Fe with the community leaning on each other, loving each other. Teachers and law enforcement officers who showed unbelievable bravery and courage, and in some instances sacrifice, giving up their lives to save the lives of their students. That's powerful as well, and it is the latter that is Texas. That's who we are, that we should celebrate and we should focus on.
All right, last thing, if anybody hears that Ted Cruz is partnering with Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, on anything, it's the kind of thing that might inspire panic. Until you learn the true bipartisan nature, that you and she and other Democrats and other Republicans are gathered in an effort amid all the Me Too movement, all the talk of harassment, all the talk of misbehavior. It absolutely happens under the Capitol dome. What are you folks trying to do about it?
Well, Kirsten Gillibrand and I have worked together for a long time, and she and I disagree on a great many issues. But where we began working together was dealing with sexual assault in the military, and that has remained, unfortunately, a persistent problem. And she's been a real leader in changing the system so that sexual assault cases are brought by professional military prosecutors rather than left to the discretion of the commanding officer. I think that's the right thing to do to ensure that we protect the safety and security of our fighting men and women. When it comes to sexual harassment and sexual assault, we've seen in recent months a horrific pattern of abuse by powerful men. We've seen it in Hollywood. We've seen it in journalism. We've seen it in business. And we've seen it in politics in the halls of Congress. And it's wrong. It's unacceptable. Every woman, every man deserves to be respected, deserves to be treated fairly, deserves not to be harassed or assaulted in the workplace by your boss. And so I've joined with Kirsten Gillibrand in introducing legislation to end taxpayer-funded settlements. That's one of the great shocks and shames is that there were secret taxpayer-funded settlements of harassment cases against members of Congress. The taxpayer shouldn't be paying for that. If you're sexually harassing an employee, you should be on the hook out of your own personal resources, and also the presumption should be that it's public. The victim has a right if the victim affirmatively desires to keep things confidential, but the presumption should be that the wrongdoer should be exposed. And so we saw the Senate come together and pass bipartisan legislation reflecting those principles that Kirsten and I have been fighting for a long, long time.
And finally, after a hard day duking it out in the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Ted Cruz decompresses at a Washington restaurant and walks in and meets whom?
Sylvester Stallone, which was it was a totally random thing. He happened to be sitting at the table next to me. And I got to tell you, Mark, I was simply a fanboy. I grew up watching Rocky and Rambo and just about, as I told him, I said, I've probably seen every movie or almost every movie you've ever made. And he was very nice and very gracious. And that was just cool. I mean, how often do you get to meet Rambo?
And it's funny because he was just in this past season or season before of This Is Us. He shows up every once in a while. He just looks great. I mean, the guy's obviously been in shape for a long time, but he just looks fantastic.
He looks terrific. He's in great shape. He's doing the latest Rocky movie, which is Creed 2. So we talked a little bit about that. He talked about, filming all the different Rocky movies. He talked about how you needed, the process of casting, how he was looking for people who were athletes. He said, you can't film someone in a boxing ring unless they're athletes and they know how to move, which I thought was fascinating. I told him I thought of all of the movies, the best ones, the fighting scenes at the end of Rocky 1 and Rocky 2 are both just incredible. And I did tell him, you'll remember this because you were there for it. I told him when I first ran for Senate in 2012 that the unofficial theme song that we would play at a lot of events was "Eye of the Tiger" from Rocky III. And he laughed. I think he enjoyed that.
Well, and it's funny because he does still keep cranking out movies, and for a lot of people it gets kind of sad. It's like, oh my God, how many times are you gonna go back to the well? But all the way up to like Rocky V and Rocky Balboa and the Creed movies, which feature Apollo's son, they are truly good. They are not just ATMs. They are genuinely good films. And and here we go. You ready? In July he turns 72.
72, and he is in great shape. We talked about he's doing Creed 2, where it involves Ivan Drago's son, from Rocky 4.
I must break you.
Yes. You will lose.
We got to drop for the show now. Can I play that when I have Beto on? Anyway, go ahead and finish. Go ahead.
Well, no, he was interesting. He was talking about the process of casting and finding an actor who looked like Drago, who was big enough and had to be, he said, about 6'5", and had the sort of blank death stare. You remember Drago had? I mean, it was ominous.
Right, Dolph Lundgren, right?
Yeah. And what I didn't know that Stallone told me is he said that Lundgren was a kickboxing champion,
wow.
Which I didn't realize that. But, that explains part of how he could, carry off the scenes as this punishing boxer.
There you go. Well, they found some guy named Florian Munteanu. That's who it is. And he doesn't even have his own Wikipedia page, but he's about to be a big star. Look at this. Breaking film news from Ted Cruz and so much more. We always appreciate the visitor. Safe travels. Best to the girls. Best to the family. Best to Heidi. And thanks so much, as always, for your time.
Mark, thank you, my friend. God bless.